Good morning and welcome to this morning's debate, the hypocrisy of the good. From fervent socialists to devout Christians, many have sought to live by a strict moral code. Yet from the gulags to the Inquisition, it has often been those with the strictest codes who have perpetrated the greatest crimes. Is this just accidental, or is there something about a strict morality that makes hypocrisy unavoidable? Should we see such terrible outcomes as a sign of the frailty of humans rather than a threat to the moral principles themselves? Or is it possible that seeking to rigorously and universally enforce any moral code blinds the adherent to the real-life consequences? Should we conclude that while a framework of good action is valuable, an attempt to subsume all human behavior within a strict code of rules is not only impossible, but dangerous? Well, to help me answer those questions, we have a fantastic panel of speakers. I'm very delighted to welcome our first of our three speakers, Ece Temelkuran, who is an award-winning Turkish journalist, author, and previous television presenter. She's published 12 books, including How to Lose a Country and her upcoming book, 10 Choices for a Better Now. I'm also joined by David Chandler. David is a professor of international relations at the University of Westminster and the founding editor of the Journal of Intervention and State Building. With 20 books published, David is a major authority in his field, known for his analysis of international policy, including humanitarian intervention. And last but not least, I'm joined by Julian Baggini. Julian is the author of numerous best-selling books on philosophy and co-founder of The Philosopher's magazine. His books include The Ego Trick, How the World Thinks, and most recently, The Godless Gospel. He's currently academic director of the Royal Institute of Philosophy. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us. So the way this is going to go, I'm going to give you a first question and you will have 3 minutes to lay out your pitches before we really dig into it. So I'm going to kick off, if I may, this first question. Does a strict morality necessarily lead to dangerous hypocrisy? Ajay, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Sure. Good morning to everyone. Well, the simple answer is yes. But the hypocrisy is not in the word good, yet in the word of strictness. It is the power and therefore the ability to impose is what corrupts the good and eventually all that is good. Due to the political sins of autocratic regimes in near history, many today tend to think that the search for the good and eventually all morality is hypocritical. And that's a dangerous thing, I would say. There is also the age-old fact that the human, with his unbearable practicality, can utilize the most intricately woven high moral values and turn them into tools of oppression. The vulgarity of the masses has the ability to degrade a moral value to a daily practice, no matter how flawlessly constructed it is in theory. It is always a very small minority who keep the intrinsic meaning of the moral value. They keep it for the future generations, despite the corrupting practicality of the masses. The oppressive morality of the capitalist system is still rarely discussed. We always talk about gulags or Chinese Cultural Revolution, and the hypocrisy of the good in this system still does not get the theoretical beating that it deserves. What is the good in today's dominant culture of capitalism is rarely a popular topic. Therefore, we easily dismiss the fact that the radical evil that is very present in today's global politics is in fact arising from the innate hypocrisy of the good in the capitalist morality. I had to think about the hypocritical good in capitalist morality in order to understand the global rise of the new authoritarianism. My initial focus was the shamelessness, in fact. While writing How to Lose a Country, I noticed that all the right-wing populist regimes, regardless of the country, render shamelessness as a political tool, and eventually shamelessness become a cultural identity. Well, our dominant culture tends to associate shame with bodily desire, yet the utilized shamelessness in today's politics derives from the damaging act on human dignity. Therefore, in order to oppose this en masse moral crime on human dignity, we have to define the good and do it through what is at stake, namely human dignity. I'm not sure if we can invent a good that is immune to corruption, yet humankind's determination to search for the good is certainly a moral value, and I think it is incorruptible. And we cannot describe that kind of good hypocritical. Thank you, Myriam.
Thank you, Ece, for that really strong opener. Lots of food for thought there. Julian, could I pick that up with you? Does a strict morality necessarily lead to a dangerous hypocrisy? 3 minutes.
Okay, well, first of all, but I agree with a lot of what Ece said, actually, although we might want to go back to a specific role of capitalism in this, because I'm a bit concerned that we tend to lump a lot of things together under that label. But look, I mean, I think, so I'm basically agreeing, but I think to sort of try and understand this properly, I think we need to make a few distinctions. That's our favourite game as philosophers. And one thing around this about strictness, when we mean a strict morality, I think we've got to distinguish a strict, or you might say a rigid morality over a demanding one. I think some of the most admirable moralities that we've had in our world are very demanding. For example, I'm not a Christian myself, but the kind of Jesus implores people to be the perfect. We can't be perfect, but he says you should try to be perfect. That's really, really demanding. That's not the same as being strict or rigid. So I think it's very important to sort of recognize the fact that if we're kind of sort of pointing the finger at rigid morality, it doesn't mean that we should favour instead a kind of a lax morality, a kind of anything goes, do what you like. There's another distinction too, I think this is perhaps the key one. I think Ece really pointed to this. It's the dogmatism, really. It's not, the strictness tends to go together with dogmatism, but it's not necessarily exactly the same thing. And it's the idea that, and by dogmatism, that it's not necessarily the same thing as a conviction. But it's that belief that not only is this right, but this must be imposed on everybody. Everybody must follow. So again, you can compare that to another form of strictness. If you take Buddhist monasteries, right? I mean, there have been corruption in Buddhist monasteries too. So I don't want to say that they're the angels, the highest angels. But in a lot of like Buddhist monasteries, life is very, very strict. They live according to very, very strict rules about the times they wake up, etc., etc. But the ethos in the best versions of these monasteries is not that this is something we must go and impose on everybody else. It's something we choose to do ourselves. We live by this code. And that doesn't lead to necessarily at all to hypocrisy and so forth. I think the final point, just to end on, which perhaps ties them up, is, moral conviction has been extremely powerful, positive change for good. People standing up to Recep Erdogan in Turkey are doing so from a very strong moral conviction, and that's really important. And I think this is the danger of thinking that we should retreat instead to some kind of moral laxity. But I think the thing that makes a difference is whether it's a moral conviction, is whether it has what we might call this epistemic conviction. In other words, it's not just that I really believe in this value, it's right, but I believe it has a status of a kind of a absolute certainty, a piece of knowledge which cannot be challenged.
That is fantastic. Thank you, Julian, as well, for not just those brilliant points, but for keeping to time. David, I'm going to put it to you now. Does a strict morality necessarily lead to a dangerous hypocrisy? We've got lots of great points already on this.
I guess I want to make 2 points around this, and the first is along the lines of Ece, and maybe the second speaks to Julian's slightly. And the question is what is it about this strict morality that may or may not necessarily lead to hypocrisy? And I want to sort of come from a slightly different angle, that I think we have to start from the world that we live in. What is it about the world that we live in that means that maybe or maybe not strict morality leads to hypocrisy? And I just want to firstly follow up a bit on Ece's point. The first thing about the world we live in is power relations, hierarchies. In that sort of a world, any type of strict morality that can be imposed is doubtlessly going to lead to problems because there's less accountability, problems of representation, problems of exclusion. And we all know that, power corrupts and all the rest of it, whether it's like literally corrupting or just the inability to see, because the way that we think about the world is normally shaped sociologically, politically, economically around our interests. And in a world of competing interests, then the more morality, the more, as Julian says, the more that can be imposed, the more potentially dangerous it is. So that's not really sort of rocket science to say that as long as we live in that sort of world, any sort of strict morality is potentially dangerous and hypocritical. But more importantly, I'd like to pick up on Julian's second point about the epistemic conviction, the knowledge conviction. And there's something else about the world, even beyond the problem of power relations, and that is it's a world of differences. We do not live in a flat, universal world where everything equals the same thing, everything causes things in a sort of a linear and reductionist way. In a world where different policies, different ideas, they might work in one time and place, they're unlikely to work in another time and place. You have a wonderful moral policy around health, around the environment, around cures, around industry, manufacture, whatever it is, you realize later on, different time and place, or even it may well be contested in the same time and place, that yeah, that doesn't actually work. If you think about the climate crisis that we're in at the moment, those are all unintended consequences. Those are all products of things that people weren't thinking about at the time because the world doesn't keep on going in exactly the same way. And so there's broader issues to think about moral codes. How could they possibly be valuable across time and space and difference? So thank you.
Thank you so much for that, David. Thank you to all of our panelists so far. So now we're going to kick off with our first theme of the debate.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.